Hey guys, this is episode 5 of Visual Podcast. Yay! And today we have nice guest, Sasquatchy, a UI designer. Welcome, Sasquatchy.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep. And so today we're going to be talking about UI, just user interfaces, the good, bad, ugly, and how to make them, I suppose. So, and you're a UI designer? And
Yeah. Do you want to maybe we could talk a little bit about like what a UI is? I
actually,
know sometimes
yes.
people call it like user interface or like GUI or graphical user interface, or some people call it GUI.
Yep.
But yeah, I feel like a lot of people, if you're listening to this, you probably know what it is. But just in case, like it's just basically when someone like opens your visual novel, it's kind of what they interact with to like kind of progress the game or to kind of control the game in a nutshell. So, and that can, I mean, it can list like what you can do with the user interface. A lot
All
of
the
visual
things.
novels, yeah. I kind of wish people would go a little bit more crazy with their UI sometimes in visual novels because it's in a lot of traditional visual novels you have like very similar types of UI. Not really sure why that is. Um,
Probably is because of simplicity. Familiarity is usually
it's just
like
easy.
inertia, and plus it's like square boxes are very easy to program, right?
Right. No, yeah, totally. And I think a lot of the time too, people kind of expect that. And it's just
Hmm.
like when you have a player that's used to playing this certain type of game in a certain way, it's just kind of comfortable.
Yep.
And they just kind of know what to expect. So
Yeah, that's always the thing, right? Like interfaces are such, like any interface, like car interface, for example, like you expect certain things to be in certain places, and people get really upset when it's not. For example, imagine if like your blinker happened to be not on the left side of the steering wheel, but it happened to be on the right side because some crazy designer did that. Like, imagine how upset people would be. Well, one, they would probably not be able to drive for like a week, right?
yeah, and I actually have made this mistake before with the UI in one of my games. Like I created this little like 5 minute game for a game jam, and I thought that the only people that would ever play it was probably like my mom and a couple of like developers on just I had become friends with that were RenPy developers. So I was like, okay, probably like 10 people are going to play this game. So I stripped out a lot of the like functionality of the UI, made it super minimal, and like assumed that people would have the knowledge of like how the things in RenPy work. Like you can have like, you know how you have like shortcuts like with the
Hmm.
keys and like, yeah. And then what ended up happening was a lot of people actually ended up playing it because it's free,
Uh-huh.
and a couple of people made videos of themselves playing it like what was it, like let's plays I guess. And then
Right.
I realized to my horror that a lot of people like it was you shouldn't assume that people will just know what to do, because a lot of the
Hmm.
people didn't even realize that there was a UI, that there were menus that they could turn the sound down on if it was too loud. And what ended up happening was there was one part of my game when the sound was really loud, and a lot of people like I saw them like they literally jumped because it was so loud, and they had no way to turn it down except for like the volume on their computer. So yeah, and I felt like that was very bad of me, and it's like no, bad designer, like why did I do like why did I assume? So I think that's just kind of a good rule of thumb when you're designing anything really, just don't assume that people will know, because like I mean, oh, there was a good quote I heard. It's like you can always idiot proof something until a better idiot comes along. I'm not saying the
Yes.
people that played my games were idiots, but it's just like, it might be someone's first time that they're playing this type of game, or you know what I mean?
Yep. Right. And they have no
So
idea.
yeah, thing I didn't
Yeah.
do. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You had your first user testing session live, sort of.
Well, and that's the thing is I only had like 2 months to make it because it was for a game jam, so I didn't do any user testing, and I probably should have. So yeah, that was mistakes were made, but now I know. I
Hmm.
know for the next couple times I do this, definitely gonna have people user test it. And I just think that's just you should do that anyways when you create UI is user testing is really, really, really important.
Yes.
Um, no,
Uh-huh.
if you're creating something, you know how it works, but that doesn't mean other people can read your mind and they would know how it works. And something that's really obvious to you might not be as obvious to other people. So
Yeah, that's like the golden rule of interface design is that what you think, what's in your head is not in anyone else's head. Uh,
totally.
mhm.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's just and even when you're designing it, I think it's really advantageous to kind of think about how other people might like look at it. And then when you're playing through your game, like when I open up my game, like sometimes when I'm playing through it, if I have difficulty like doing anything, like sometimes when I program some of my own UI, and then
Mhm.
sometimes I notice that like something might be wonky or off, and I'm like, well, oh
Yeah.
crap, this isn't good. Like, and I know what
Mhm.
it's supposed to do, and
Right.
yeah, like users won't be able to like intuit um like what they're supposed to do. Like they just won't know if you
Mhm.
even have trouble with anything for sure.
Definitely. So yeah. So well, tip number one, guys, user test your stuff.
Yes, please do. And I actually full-time work at a web development agency, and we do a lot of user, like we spend a good chunk of money doing user testing for the websites that we create for
Mhm.
exactly the same reasons.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Do you
if
guys
you
do that in
can do it.
house?
So we use usertesting.com.
Okay. I have a
Yeah,
bunch
which
of
is a
people use that.
site. Would you say?
Oh, no, no, a bunch of people use that. I've previous places I've worked on have used that too. It works well for sites. I don't know. You can't really do game-like things unless you make it into a site, right?
So user testing for people who might not know, it's like it's usertesting.com, and then you basically pay money, and then you're like, here, like let's user test this website, and then they'll send it out to like random other people, like, and you have demographics that you can target. So if you have a site that's for like women ages like 50 to 60, they can send those sites to those women, and then the women will like go onto the websites and they'll like navigate around, and you can have them like go through like a shopping cart and try to buy
Mhm.
something or maybe try to find something. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to
Right.
figure out what
But
works.
you give
But
them a list of tasks, right? Like do this, do that.
exactly. But they don't, but what you're saying is they don't have we don't have anything like that for games, do we? That I know
Not
of.
really that you can know of, but I'm thinking, well, can we leverage the either using Tesla.com or some other thing? Because like this is not a novel need. Everyone needs to do this at some point, right? And I'm like, I've seen places do it in house. It's a lot of effort to do it in house to recruit random people to test your thing, and it's a lot of work. And so there are some services. I'm wondering, can game developers leverage that?
Like somewhere where you could go and say
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, I have this site, I need, or not site, but I have this game and I
Mm-hmm.
need people to help me with testing it, and then yeah, it would just all be set up for you.
That would be cool. Or, like not even a part of the game, but like just the UI for the thing, right? If you mocked it up somewhere so people have people navigate it and just like try to turn up the volume and then watch people as they horribly fail. Right?
Yes, yeah, this is like, I think this is a really good idea actually. Like, why don't we have this already? Like,
All right. So some entrepreneur, here's a free business idea. If you can get a user testing thing for games out, go do it. Because I'm sure there are
yeah,
people who need it.
I would pay money honestly to use that for games. I think that would be
Oh,
wonderful.
definitely. Yeah. Because otherwise you have to do QA, like normal internal testing, which means that the testers kind of know what's going on. And so you get a bias sample and it's not really fun.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes too, when you have like for visual novels specifically, if like a lot of the times when I've had people test the games, I go through the Lemasoft forums,
Hmm?
which is all visual novel devs, and I ask people to help me on there, but like they are very, very familiar with like visual novels.
Mm-hmm.
So they that might, if you wanted to know like how someone had experience playing with a visual novel, um, that might be kind of hard to do.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Because they're also, if they're really familiar with development, they're kind of okay with certain quirks. It's like, yeah, I get why this menu kind of sucks. It's because it's so hard to program otherwise. I just accept it, right? A normal user would be like, no, this is horrible. I don't know what's going on. but
Yeah, and
they're
feel
they're yeah,
frustrated.
right. And so there is this weird dynamic of people who are too experienced testing something. So you have to test them. You have to test a bunch of people. That's what makes user testing hard. Yeah, you can't just test like two people usually and get all the details you want. You'll get the big things. Like if some button doesn't work, like everyone will find that. But like more subtle things that are still important are gonna get lost, I think.
Think a good test too might like, this is horrible, but like to hand it to someone who's like completely like who doesn't use computers a lot and doesn't know a lot about games, like maybe your mom or your grandma or like somebody who just like has never like seen or touched a visual novel before. And like that
Hmm.
could be a really good measurement is if they know if they're able to like get through the game and use the menus,
Right.
then I mean
Yeah.
it's pretty, yeah, it's pretty
Hmm.
solid.
Yep.
Um
But yeah. Well, anyways, like failing all that, if you can convince someone in person to do it, it's all I always recommend people they watch it happen. Don't like it's one thing to just punt them a file and say, hey, play this and then tell me what's wrong. But to watch them do it is a whole new level of like understanding what's going on. Because people don't always articulate, right? Like if you've ever seen some user test, like seen someone get really confused, like they physically move in their seat when they're like, I don't get this. They lean forward, they scratch their chin. They're like, what's going on? And sometimes they don't even say it. They're just doing it and about something, and then they figure it out. But like watching them, you can tell that they're struggling, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's one thing I saw when like Let's Players made like videos of them playing my game is like because I stripped a lot of the things out of my game and then I saw them like searching for it on screen with their mouse, like, oh, where's the menu? How do I get the menu? And then like they when they couldn't find it, they just assumed there was no menu. And that was really helpful for me because next I was like, oh, like should probably have a visual indicator in game moving forward that there's a menu somewhere. Probably
Hmm.
shouldn't rip that out next time, but yeah,
Well,
valuable lessons were learned for
that's
sure, for
probably an
sure.
assumption that everyone just kind of ran with. It's like, yeah, there's a menu button, right? Like, but what happens when you don't have a menu button? So
You'll
you
find it.
you learn something. You learn something that some
Yeah.
people just don't even question, which is cool.
And that's the thing is, because when I was making it, I showed it to my fiance, who is very, very like he plays a lot of games, he works with computers, and like I asked him, I was like I said, like, do you think there's a menu in this game? And he was able to bring it up right away. So I was like, oh, good. Like, he knows what's up. He's like, and I asked him like, is that was that hard to do? Like, would you have done it differently? And he's like, no, this is what I would do. This makes sense to me. I was like, cool, it's gonna make sense to everyone. Like, you got it.
So he like
So
managed to hit escape or whatever it was, and
yeah, well,
boom.
yeah, that was what it was. You hit escape, and then you brought up the like I called it the everything menu in my game. It had everything under it. So I was like, okay, cool, we're solid. But
Hmm.
no, not at all. Not at all. So
Okay. So yeah.
yeah.
All right. So user testing, but we're not all UI is just about user testing, though. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. But okay, so let's talk about like making a UI or designing a UI, right? Because I know you do a lot of that. And walk me through like your process. Like someone comes to you and says, "I want a UI. What do they need to give you so that you can do your job well?"
Sure, yeah. So usually, when someone wants to design a UI and work together creating that, like I'll ask them, like, first it's just really good to kind of get an idea of like what kind of screens you want to do, what kind of menus you might need to have. Every game, every visual novel is totally unique in what they might have. There are some like standards, but there are games, that they might not want to have like a traditional text box or they might have like extra menus, they might have mini games. So I think that's just really important to take account of, like first steps wise, like what is everything that's going to be in the game, and just kind of make a note of that, just because everything is so unique to what you're doing. And the really cool thing is you can customize it any way you want usually. So that's kind of nice. I think it's great.
Hmm.
And it seems like a lot more game like probably like 5 years ago, people weren't putting in like menus about like crediting creators or having like I've like now that it's built into RenPy, there's like the help screen, which tells you about like key commands and shortcuts. I've been seeing that a lot recently. A lot of people, I mean, this is not new, but a lot of people are adding CG screens, and like I've been getting a lot more requests to do like mini game type things as
Oh,
well. Yeah. So that's been interesting. But yeah, beyond like accounting for like what kind of types of UI, like or UI screens that you want to design, I think the next thing I ask is like, what kind of like mood tone, like what are the themes in your game, like what's your game all about? And like a big part of like designing the UI, I think, is like a good UI design in a visual novel will complement like the game's like mood and story and tone. Like,
mhm.
so if you have like, just to give like a random example, like if you had like a sci-fi game type of game with like these really crazy like lasery elements, and it felt like really futuristic, and then you just had like a very like, I don't know, if you just went with like the default UI or just a very like basic UI, like I don't like, that's fine. I'm not saying that's wrong. But
But
like a really great UI. Well, go ahead, sorry.
I'm just thinking, well, okay, let's just go like the most totally ridiculous way, right? You have your sci-fi game, but everything on your UI looks like wood. Just like
Yeah.
that alone, right? Wood
Yeah,
panels.
but I mean, so the beauty about design is there's never a right or a wrong way. But I think that if you're mindful of like what you're trying to achieve, and if you have reasons behind everything, that'll make your UI so much better. So like if you have a sci-fi UI and then you're like, well, I just want my UI to look like wood, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
And
It just feels
that's not
weird.
complement your game. But if you create the UI in mind with like your tone and your, your graphical elements, it's going to be so much better. And the UI, you can use the UI to kind of elevate um, your player's experience in game, because it's all going to be really cohesive and it's all going to like look and feel very similar. And I think that's a really good part of like helping draw the player into your story, into your world, is like, if the UI is cohesive with everything else, it just, oh, it feels so good. And it's like, oh, it's like, it looks really great. And it just kind of like, I don't know. I feel like it's really important in like creating like this sort of like helping with like the story that you want to tell. But
Yeah.
it's kind of sad because I feel like a lot of people don't really, um, it kind of just feels like an afterthought. I feel like that's sad, like that's bad to say, but in a lot
Mm,
of games that I played that are older. Oh, go ahead. We're gonna say something.
it's kind of fair in some instances. Like at least when I evaluate visual novels or things, the two things I use to judge like how much thought was went into the game is often how their UI is and what their background music usage is, because those two things are the most backgroundy things that you can spend money on in a game, right? Like you can have a visual novel without background music, and you can have one with a really crappy UI, and it would still function, but it means that you didn't pay that much attention to it, right? The polish isn't
For
there,
sure.
and it feels really like it's usually a sign of like they didn't care as much, or they ran out of money or something. So that's how I look at it when I was a normal consumer about it.
What you're saying, and it's kind of crazy too, because like they are like a lot. I think a lot of times, yeah, people do see them as backgroundy, but they're actually like
Hmm.
they both play a huge part in like helping like tell your story and like create something that's like, especially like, so background music, especially because it'll set like the tone and the mood, and like it just really like drives home like a certain like feeling or point that you might want to make. And
Hmm.
like same thing with UI. Like it's just, I feel like it's really important because like the UI is basically how players will interact with your game. Um and like like I know I said
Hmm.
earlier, you don't want to frustrate them. And like one of the biggest things to keep in mind, because if you have like a really horrible UI and they end up getting frustrated, like I've played like games before where I couldn't figure it out
Hmm.
and I didn't want to touch it anymore because like the UI and the design was like that bad. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's the worst thing that could happen, is you make people, I mean, that's a
Hmm.
very extreme case. I'm not saying, but
Yeah.
it is possible to, yeah, I think it's just really good to be mindful.
Definitely. because every UI is always different. So that's the problem. Uh, so you do have to kind of like work around the unique issues each time for everything. Oh, I have one question. So when people ask you for UIs, how often do you get this thing where it's like, oh, I just need the standard stuff, as if that there is a standard thing, like they just kind of wave it off because they haven't thought about it? How often does that come up?
I mean, they don't normally say like I need the standard stuff, but a lot of the times they'll ask for a UI and then I'm like, cool, like tell me about your game and like what do I need? And sometimes they'll ask for it, but they won't tell me what they need exactly. And I'm like, okay, well, like, what do you need? What kind of screens are we making? So, but
So let's
yeah,
get,
I feel like
yeah, let's get some scope docs, guys.
yeah, I need to know what's happening. Like, what are we doing? Yeah. So, but I mean, yeah, and I think there is like this assumption, like, oh yeah, all the visual novels have like a text box and like the save, the load, and I mean that's totally fine if you're just making something like super basic. Like, yeah, that's not a bad thing. It's just that because there are so many variations in like what you can do, like
Right.
you might not want to have like I don't know, you don't have to have any of the things. So
Yeah.
you can cut it out, you can add more. So yeah, it's just really
Hmm.
cool and what like your unlimited options for as far as screens and menus go.
Right. Because I remember there were some older Japanese visual novels that had like that took the UI and got rid of the text box and made word bubbles, right? And the menu would center around your mouse instead of popping up like it normally does in the center of your screen. I kind of miss those. You don't see those very much anymore, which is sad. But they did like put some extra effort into those UIs.
Somebody did one recently. I think it was for a game jam. I'm trying to remember what it was called. It was it the way it all goes? The
I don't know.
way
We
it
can look
all
it up.
goes. Yeah, I'll look. They did something similar where they instead of like the standard text box, they had these bubbles that would pop up between characters,
Hmm.
and I had not seen that before. I have not. I'm pretty new to visual novels. Like by new, I mean like a couple years. So that was like really cool.
Hmm.
Um,
It's really impressive when they do it. Like I've seen it only a couple of times in life where they do the word bubble thing, and if they do it very well, it's really like amazing.
touch because instead of like being confined to this text box it's like you see this character talking and then this character talking and
Hmm.
it's yeah it's and I think it's cool too because yeah it's not often done and I think it's hard to do well um
Definitely.
and I'm not sure why it's so hard to do well I think
It's probably like the placement of it. It's just harder. You
yeah
have to like say the box goes here, right? And the little word, the little what is that tail on the word bubble? I don't even know what they call it, but that has to like line up roughly pointing at the character. If you want to do it really well, but that means that you have to move it, and programmatically that's a pain. But you can do some cool stuff with it. I remember seeing like um, when you use the bubble method, what happens is that you can have like background chatter come up as like little side bubbles, and they just pop up and go away really quickly. And it shows something different that you can't do in a normal text box, which is really cool.
yeah I guess with the normal text box you could have like a background sounds of chatter
Hmm.
but I think it's really cool that you have that visual impact as well of like
Yeah,
the bubbles.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that was really cool.
The
Yeah.
game was that did that?
This was the game that did this was I'm thinking about was Tapestry by Light. This was like a 2000 like 9, 8 game. Oh my god. It's like 10 years
Wow.
old. So this is not new technology, guys.
That's
Someone's created
awesome.
this. But yeah, it was really cool when I played it. It was a nice game. They have since gone on to make other games that are also crazy but in different ways. So, anyways, back to UIs. We were talking about. Oh, I know. We were talking about when people were asking you for UIs, and you were like halfway through before I cut you off.
Oh yeah. Okay. So we figure out all the screens
Hmm.
that they need, and then usually I'll figure out the tone of like what they want to achieve. And
Hmm.
then like once we go through all that and a lot like just trying to figure out like what they want to do with it and like what kind of game they have before we even get started designing I usually create something called like a UI kit which is like we don't even
Oh.
get start designing the screens but I'll create some sort of like I guess kit where it's got like assets from their game that they have. So like any background, CGs, character sprites. And then I will like lump that together with like text and buttons and like color palettes and textures and just like anything we would want to use in the UI. Like I would show like, okay, here's an example of like what it's all going to look like together. And
Oh,
everyone, yeah. And I
that's
have
really
some
cool.
examples.
Okay,
Yeah, I
so
have some
this is like
examples.
all the assets. So like this is like the raw material that you would use to like build the UI or like mock the UI up, I suppose.
Yeah, basically. And like, so we'll have like buttons, sliders, like maybe a small like little snippet of like a menu or text box and just it's kind of like a hodgepodge of like everything but the kitchen sink type deal where it's just like all kind of like thrown together like here. And like it's not a design at all. It's just to give them a feeling of like here's what the UI could look like. And I just sent you a link if you want to like look at it in
Oh, okay,
Imgur.
cool. I'll bring
Yeah.
that up. Oh, I see. Okay, I'm gonna have to screenshot this. But yeah, yeah. I was thinking when you said kit, the word that popped up in my mind was well, especially in web design, right? Like all the standardized components and widgets that you have, right? Like all the text boxes are gonna look this way, all the drop downs are gonna look that way, scroll bars this way, right? That kind of stuff is like
Right.
defined up, and then as you use them, you just pull from the shelf, like, oh, I need this, and put them together, and then that's my UI for this screen. Right,
That's
so that's
kind of
what it
what
is.
we do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it's not set in stone the way I do it because like the first time I showed them the UI kit or like that I make, which is just a suggestion. Like sometimes I've had people look at it and be like, "No, this isn't what I was going for at all.
Yep.
This is wrong." And then it's like, "Okay, that's fine. Like we can scrap that. Like this took me like 30 minutes to make." And I actually everybody I work with, I do these for free. I think it's like such a good part of the process. Like I just feel like it really helps us get on the same page of like how
Mm-hmm.
things should look like visually before we even spend time designing. Because I feel like before I did this, I would design a menu and they would look at it and they'd be like, it would be two things, right? Because they'd have all these changes for the menu and then they wouldn't menu or the menu would feel wrong
Right.
because they
Yeah.
hadn't decided. Yeah. And it's just like you're literally like shooting in the dark and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, at this target that's like far, far away. And I have no idea like what they might want.
Right.
And I just feel like by doing something beforehand where we kind of nail down like what everything's going to look like, it just makes designing the
Mm-hmm.
screens afterwards easier.
Definitely, because it's always hard to like sometimes you have those people that say like, oh, I want this feel, but then when it gets down to actual thing elements and they finally see it, they're like, oh, my idea totally is garbage, right? And then they hate it and they want to change it.
Well, yeah, sometimes you have something in your head and you're like, oh, it'd be so awesome if we did this, this, and this. And then when you do like there, it's like, oh, it didn't. So, and that's fine. I mean, sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't look the way you had imagined it, or it just feels
Mm-hmm.
wrong.
Right.
And I think that's a really good part of the process is like,
Mm-hmm.
and figuring out what works together and
Yep.
what is going to be right for your game.
Definitely. So yeah, so that's a good recommendation that people should do this. Even before they bring on a UI person, they should be like thinking what the visual elements are going to be in their game because they're going to need it anyway, right? Not just for the UI, but like that kind of those little widget things are going to be used everywhere for all sorts of things. So you might as well have them.
Like if they wanted to do like even a simple logo or something or things outside of their game, like if they wanted to create like a Kickstarter or something, like they could take those elements from their like UI kit and kind of use that as like a style guide for
Mm-hmm.
anything they did outside.
Definitely.
So I've definitely seen people
Right,
do
because
that.
then you already have like transition elements and bars and header things, right? And it's all there, and it looks really polished when it's consistent all over the place on your website, on your Kickstarter, on your game itself.
Reinvent the wheel, just like
Right,
use what you have, and
right,
it'll
and
be
it makes you
awesome.
look so pro for being. Yeah, I planned this all out from the beginning, and I look so smart.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's fine to reuse elements, especially if
Mm-hmm.
that's like what your game's aesthetic is, and yeah, it'll look really
Mm-hmm.
good. So why
Definitely.
not?
All right. So okay, so we've scoped out the things, we picked out the widgets. We now agree that we're going to use this stuff to make a UI, right? So then what happens from there?
So then we like actually start designing the screens. And I mean, just take it step by step. So usually I'll work on a screen. I usually like to start with the text box. And like sometimes people will ask me to do like, so if you're working on a game and you have a logo for your game, I will actually say like, if you can, maybe don't do the logo first. Cause I feel like doing the logo first is like creating like a cover for a book that hasn't been written yet. Because if we do the logo first, I only have like a vague idea of how like the whole like aesthetic for like the UI is going to feel, and usually I try to like make it all work together. And I feel like there's so much pressure. I know we're not talking about logo design, but I feel like
we can if you want.
No, we don't have to get into it. But I just think it's just as far as like everything within your game, it should be really cohesive and matching. And yeah, I just like to jump into the UI first. But yeah, we'll do screen by screen. A text box is a really good place that I like to start just because it's probably what people are going to be interacting the most with. And like the menu that they see like in game. And yeah, I mean, we just go through revisions of that. And sometimes when I'm designing things, sometimes I notice like people, like if they are not like completely happy with it, but like a lot of the times like people can't articulate why they're
Right.
uncomfortable with it, but for some reason they're uncomfortable. It's like, okay, like if you're working on something like within the UI of your game and you feel like something's not right, I think it's really good to just kind of like break things down and like start over and like start from scratch. And then another thing that's really good to do too is inspiration. So sometimes like if something's not working, I'll ask people like, okay, what is a similar thing you've seen that you've liked that works well? And like, let's pull from that. Let's get ideas outside of that. And I think that can be really, really
Yeah.
helpful for obviously, but you can look at what other people are doing and then say like, oh, like I like how they laid out this one screen in this way, and maybe we could do a similar composition for our screen.
Right.
And then yeah, and I mean we just go step by step. Like I mean, I think it's really good to do one screen at a time and like build, and then you can kind of get make sure that everything's like working well together and that it all looks good.
Yep. So normally how do you, like, I guess, what do you use to like build these things and then show them, like Photoshop, or is there a tool or something that you guys use?
Usually use Photoshop and create all the designs in there, and then just send like a JPEG mock-up to show like here's what it looks like all together.
Okay,
And
that's
it's
cool.
really good. I think it's really good if you have like art from the game or like background images, sprites, whatever. Like I think when you're creating a UI for your game, like use those in your mock-ups and make sure it all looks good together. And it's actually, I think, because I have worked on games where I've designed the UI without any art assets.
Ooh.
But yeah, it's really weird because then I feel like I'm guessing a little bit at what it's going to be. And I usually will say like, we can do that, but I would recommend come back to me once you have all your art assets. And I think it's going to look a lot better, a lot stronger.
Or at least have some art assets, right? We don't have to be complete, but
Right.
one background, maybe one sprite. So at least
Yes.
like basic parameters, like for example, like how many pixels is this text box going to be, right? As opposed to we're just gonna have a text box. It could be 10 pixels, it could be 1,000 pixels, but they're just not telling you. I can imagine that's really frustrating.
I mean, it can be. It's again like the reason that you would want art assets before is because it kind of goes a step in like creating like the mood and the tone and like really like this world that your story takes place in, and it's kind of like a piece of the puzzle. And if you take away that piece, it's like, well, it's fine. It's not wrong to do the UI first, but then sometimes if you create the UI and then you have an artist that goes off and does their own thing and doesn't like look at the UI, then it is possible that they might kind of mismatch,
Oh yeah.
feel, yeah, like disjointed, like the how we talked about earlier with like the sci-fi and the wood.
Yes.
So, yeah, yeah, so there is that risk. But I mean, it's possible, especially if you have like a strong vision for your game and you know what you want to do, what everything's going to be like. So
Hmm.
I
But
don't want
yeah,
to tell people absolutely don't do this because there's really no right or wrong way to do it. And yeah, I mean, when I
yeah,
do my games, I create the art and the UI for like all the like little projects that I do, and usually I'll do the UI first. When
hmm,
I've got a little bit of art, but I like to do the UI first because I know exactly what I'm gonna do.
right.
Just I like having the UI done, and then I kind of create the art like to complement the UI. I know that sounds so weird. Just
No,
I like
it's
doing.
like it's fitting the picture into the picture frame, right? Like you have to crop your shots to fit the frame, um, at the minimum, right? Like if you draw the head and it pokes out of the thing, it feels weird and all that kind of stuff. So the UI is not determining your art, but it does put constraints on it.
Actually seen like games where the like UI artist and the actual artist are the same are like so lovely to look at. Like off the top of my head, Deji, she's done a couple where she's done the UI herself, and like it looks so sleek and so good, and it's all fitting together.
I mean, unified art direction is always great.
Potato is another one where he does a lot of UI and art in his games, and I can send you some examples of this too. And it just like it looks so it just yeah it looks really intentional and like polished and professional. So
Cool. If you send me those, I'll stick them into the video right around now, and people can look at them and link them. Okay, so where are we in this journey of creating a UI, right? So you've agreed on the thing. So you're actually building it. So as a designer, I guess you hand the like finalized like art Photoshop files over to the programmer dude so that they can slice it up and put it into the game.
okay,
I
yeah, I'll
guess.
usually give them like Photoshop and PNG files.
Hmm.
I don't really like to program them. I'm not the best programmer. I can do it, but I will break the things. So yeah, I've definitely done some programming before. But yeah, usually I'll just hand them off to people. But sometimes I know some people do UI design and offer programming as well. So and that's really good too because you have someone who's willing to do that, who can do that, like
Hmm.
they're probably going to do it perfectly. Um,
Hopefully.
I have had, yeah, yeah, like I mean by perfectly, I mean like everything in game matches exactly what the mock-up looks like that they
Mhm.
like
Okay.
exactly how they design each menu and
Yeah, that's good. As opposed to like being like 5 pixels off that way, so nothing's quite aligned and it looks horrible just because of that.
yeah, that's actually happened to me before where I did that where I created like I designed this UI and I handed it off and I don't know what happened. I guess maybe there was some difficulty with like the programming because when I saw the finalized game, it was so different than what I designed. I was like, whoa, like I was really and I
Surprise.
was like, yeah, it wasn't a good surprise.
So, oh
But
no, my name is on this.
yeah,
Help.
well, no, and I just kind of felt like, oh, like I
Yeah.
guess if the person who is creating the game is happy with it and they like it, like I hope they're happy with it. But
Mm, but
yeah, it
yeah.
wasn't so much like, oh, you ruined it. It was just like, oh no, like that's so different from what we did. I didn't want to I didn't feel comfortable messaging them to say like what happened? Like why does it look like this? But it did make me like I just maybe they did it themselves or
Hmm.
yeah, I didn't want to make them feel bad about it or be
Yeah.
weird about it, but if they're happy with it, then I guess
Hmm.
that's good. So
Yep. Just slightly awkward. It was just, okay. That happened.
yeah, and that's actually happened at work too, where because
Hmm.
we redesign our website every few years, and the last time we did our website redesign, like I was part of like designing our web pages, and then we
Hmm.
handed them off to the developers, and like some of the things were like wonky in the way that they implemented them, and then it's like, whoa, what happened?
What
And
did you
they're like,
do?
oh, yeah. and the thing was like is that they had time constraints and that
Hmm.
they have to like bill all of their time and like they have other client projects that they had to be working on and they weren't given enough time to do it. So it was like, oh,
Ah,
okay, that's how it
ah,
sucks.
yes.
So yeah, they weren't given enough time. So like it's not that they like again, it's like you can't assume like it's not that they were bad, but maybe they, sometimes they're on
Hmm.
a deadline, sometimes they don't have the necessary tools or anything. So I guess if you're creating UI, that's just something to keep in mind as you're planning is if you're on a deadline, like I think definitely try to accustom for yeah, that
Like
time.
implementation is a serious thing. Like bugs happen. Like there's a lot of debugging that goes on with UI design that people don't realize until it happens, right? Like when something is 3 pixels to the right and you don't know why, that's a pretty hard bug to figure out.
And like I remember doing a game jam one time where I was doing the UI for the game,
Hmm.
and they built in 2 weeks to do all of the UI. I was like, oh wow, like I
Oh,
hope that's
that's
enough time. I mean, I know we gotta go fast, but
uh,
but it was fine because it was a free game, and they were gonna like they were gonna finish it after the game jam. So they're like, I think this will be like good for the basics, and then we'll keep working on it afterwards.
it's the MVP, guys. It's okay. It's the MVP.
Right.
Bring it back into the real world web business that we live in.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
V1, guys. V1. It's okay.
Yeah.
Oh man, all the industry things we can talk about that are just horrible, horrible jokes.
Oh, gosh. I'm kind of scared too.
Well, we're not going to wander that far into the thing, but okay. Yeah, we're the dark side of just work in general. Okay, so UI, you got this thing implemented. It works. Oh, one thing we didn't cover was like transitions, like animations, that kind of stuff. A lot of UIs have that. Like, how often do you get pulled into doing that kind of stuff?
So I don't touch that kind of stuff. Usually because I don't program things. If somebody
Hmm.
comes to me and says like I want to do like some sort of transitions or animations, we absolutely like I could animate that stuff in Photoshop. But
Hmm.
like as far as programming goes, like oh my gosh, like
Right.
please don't make me do that. Because
Hmm.
I'll probably struggle to program it.
Hmm.
I did get to work on this cool game. I can't talk too much about the details because it's
Hmm.
commercial. But I created all the stuff, and then the instead of like working on the transitions, like we talked about it, and they would say like, okay, well, we need to create buttons like these because we're going to have them like grow and shrink when the users hover over them.
Oh.
So like yeah, so I would work with that in mind, and then I
Uh-huh.
all I had to do was hand the files over to their programmer who was like awesome, and he would make all of that into a reality. So
Perfect.
that was really fun. And they had like on the main menu screen, like we had this background that was animated that would like
Hmm.
slide by all the characters.
Uh-huh.
So it wasn't, yeah, I really didn't have to do too much except for when you design the screens,
Hmm.
you have to kind of keep in mind the animation.
Oh,
And then,
okay.
yeah, we just build the graphics. And then obviously, all the animation is done with programming and with
Hmm.
whatever program you're trying to use. But design, I mean, when you design for it, there's not, you just kind of have to be mindful of how, like, all the, like, whatever you're trying to do, how that's going to work with your graphics. So, like, when we created the main menu screen with like the scrolling background, we had to make it seamless because it was just going to loop like indefinitely. So so because we talked about that and they kind of
Uh-huh.
said like we want to kind of do it like this, and then it's like okay, so we'll just make it like we'll do this pattern that can just like and you'll
Right.
never like yeah. Whereas if you
Hmm.
made like an image and you had it like if you took a photograph and had it like slide by, like there would be it would
That
be really
line.
awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
That
just like
transition line. Hmm.
so just kind of stuff like that to keep in mind. But I don't. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Just
Well,
trying to.
it is like you have to be very mindful of it, and animation is much harder. You have to have it becomes a team effort at that point because not very few people will be able to do all the things necessary to do a transition.
Yeah, finding someone who can do all the things is like finding a unicorn. I
Yes,
feel like yeah, there's so many
unicorns.
parts. Yes, Yeah, and programming, I have so much respect for people who can like program things really well, just from like
Hmm.
my experiences. If you can, like, if to people who are listening, if you can like devote time to like learn programming, I would say even if you end up hiring someone, I would say just try if you haven't already, because I just think just knowing what you can do and knowing like the basics, I think is just really, really helpful because once you know that, you kind of can work within like basics of like whatever you're using and you kind of get a good idea of like, oh, like here's how these things like would normally go. And it just, yeah, just with anything, I think it just
Yeah,
gives you a good foundation to build on.
it's good. Yeah, I always recommend people don't have to be an expert at it, but have to have done a little bit of it at least once, or at least shadow someone who does, because you just learn all sorts of what can go wrong so that you can plan for it.
Yeah. And when I started working at my day job at my web development agency, I got thrown into the deep end of the pool because they had me do a web design platform that I had never touched or seen the back end of. And
Hmm.
like, so there was this platform we were building these websites on, and I was like, I like, you want me to like design this? And I don't even like, guys, I don't even like know what it can, like, I don't know all the functionality that it's
Hmm.
capable of. And like, oh my gosh, it
Uh-huh.
was crazy. But I mean, you learn as you go.
You have no
And
choice.
I mean, that was also just me being kind of like terrified. It's like, what? I don't know what I'm doing. Like, you want me to
Hmm.
what? Yeah.
Hmm. Well,
But
nowadays, now that you've done this once, it's like the next time it'll be easier, right?
for sure, for sure. So
Thrown into the deep end. Hmm.
yeah, and I think that's a really great thing about designing UI because if you're going to do it yourself, like the more you do it, like I feel like the first time it probably feels really, really hard and challenging, but I think if you can have fun with it, like that's the most important thing because if you're not having fun with it,
Hmm.
show in your design. But if you just have fun, like experiment, play, and just yeah, just try to keep in mind like what you want to achieve and like your story and the aesthetic you're going for, I think you can end up creating something really cool.
Yep, that's the dream. Uh, okay, so we're pushing 40, we're at 48 minutes of recorded stuff. Wow,
Okay.
this time just flew. So we should slowly wrap things up, or at least wander off into something interesting or something else. So if I'm someone who's looking to hire a UI person, just to either design my UI or everything. Do you have any tips for like what to look for, what to avoid, or just where to find these people?
Um, so yeah, I think uh, their portfolio is a really good place to start. But as
Mm,
far as like finding someone who's dependable and someone who's going to be reliable, because like I've heard of like horror stories of like freelancers just going like MIA or like just
yeah.
something, or maybe
Yep.
they just take a while to get back. I think um, if you're new and you don't know anybody and you're just getting started, maybe try to find somebody with like a lot of testimonials
Mm,
and experience and proven experience of just like they've done this before and the people they've worked with are really happy. Um, and you can ask too. I think asking around and other people like, hey, I saw that you use this UI designer for your game. Can you tell me a bit about them? Were they good? Like, are
mhm.
they gonna do what they say they will? Just like, yeah, I
It's
think
like
that goes a really long way.
right. It's a common question would be like, would you work with them again? Yes or no?
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's hard too because like the internet's this huge place
Mm,
and like if you just hire somebody, like I feel like without doing your homework first, it could go either way. Um,
definitely.
yeah, so
Uh huh.
that's good. And just I think also just how
Mm,
much like they're willing to like talk to you and like if they seem like when I've hired people for projects, just do they seem like genuinely interested? Are they friendly? Another thing is like, do you think you'll work well together with them? I think those are just really important questions because like someone a great fit for like project A and team A, but they might not necessarily like I think just fit in well with another type of project. And
mhm.
yeah.
Definitely.
I'm trying to think of like a nice way to say that.
There,
There's
there's
no
there's a
nice.
certain chemistry factor involved, right? There's just their style might be suited for certain ways, but it's also just like how they work is different. Like like team leads are always quirky and have their own things, but like personalities will clash in some instances. So it's like it might work, like this designer might work great for this one project, this one person, but it just doesn't work for you because you guys communicate differently, you guys refer to things differently, and then have a lot of trouble making each other understood. So when that happens, it's just the chemistry wasn't there, and it's probably a good idea to walk away.
I've had that happen to me where I worked with this one person who was like upset that I wasn't getting back to him quickly enough within like a day. And I was like, well, also the thing this was kind of my fault too, because I never said, hey man, this is something I do on the side. And I have my full-time job and my family and my fiance and my 2 dogs. And like, we ended up like, he pulled the plug on that project because like, and I didn't realize he needed, first of all, I should have asked like, how often do you want to check in? And like, so that was my bad. And I didn't realize he wanted me to go that much until he was like really upset about it. And then the other thing was like moving forward with all my like people that I work with now, I say, hey, like, I'm really sorry. I just want to be transparent with you. But like, this is something I do on the side. I'll be in touch with you every 2 to 3 days at worst, but I do have a full-time job and like all these other commitments and responsibilities. So, and most of the time people are pretty reasonable and they're like, oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
But
it's the setting of that expectation that's important.
And just transparency. Like if you have things that are limiting or like how you like to work, I think just tell people that up front, and people are usually pretty kind and will understand.
Yeah, is the worst is when they don't know anything and you're just like dead silent, even for like a couple of days. Like if they expect it, then no problem, right? If they're used to it, it's great. But sometimes, like I know some people are like, "Oh my god, I sent you an email 8 hours ago. Why haven't you responded?" It's like, it's like, dude, chill out.
Yeah. Email's kind of like one of those things where it's like, you shouldn't expect a response right away. And with like some people, I'm like, I know some people really like phone calls. So I've even said like, hey, let's just jump on the phone. Let's like talk on Skype and sometimes that's easier too, especially if you need to like explain something visual. And instead of writing like 10 paragraphs, like detailed, it's like, let's just talk about it.
Yeah, so I'll send you a screenshot. We'll talk about it. It'll take 5 minutes and we'll be done, right? Like, yeah, there's definitely some things should be done not in person, but like at least face to face, so to speak.
I think it's good to find someone who will like meet you halfway on some of these things too, if you can.
Definitely. Well, eventually you will find people that you work well with, and ideally the relationship continues on from there. And so, that person gets more jobs, they get a reliable designer that they know how to work with, and everyone's happy, hopefully.
It's a dream.
That's the dream. Okay, well, we're at 54 minutes. I think we're good. Unless you have anything like that you want to call out, like any kind of really cool UI things that you're like, hey guys, you should really check this stuff out because it's really awesome.
I can't think of anything. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm putting you on the spot. That's cool. It's fine.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not helpful. I like, are you talking about like resources for people to use?
No, just like if you think there's like something that you think is really that people should know more about, just like in the UI world, whether it's a resource or it's just like this person's doing good work or a tool, something.
There's a lot of freebies on the Lemmasoft forums that people have created of even like working UI that you can download and use for your game, which I think are pretty cool. So I could send you some of those.
I didn't know that existed, so that's really cool. But it's a good place to get ideas, if nothing.
That's kind of how I started learning how to like work with like programming in RenPy and like customizing UI, because I was able to download those and then I could open them up and like look at their code and be like, oh, that's how they did this. And I stole that code for my games. So I thought that was really neat that people, there's a ton of stuff on the Lemmasoft forum. So yeah,
it's really cool. And definitely something I didn't know about. So that was really cool. All right. Well, then thank you very much for joining me and talking about all this stuff about UI. I might have to have more UI stuff in the future. I don't know what though. Maybe testing is a thing that it's a whole topic, right?
Yeah, please do. This stuff is awesome. And there's so much that goes into UI design. I feel like we didn't even just barely scratch the surface today.
Like we didn't even go into particulars. Like we can totally devote a thing to like, I don't know, text boxes or menus or save load screens. I'm sure we can both spend like 15 minutes each just ranting about each of those elements.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah. So well, until next time then, thank you so much for being here.